Okay, so we're about to start our webinar, this time sharing what finance teams really think about their processes and also a bit of a look at what the future might hold. People are just joining us now. If you'd like to say hi and introduce yourself in the chat room, we can see where you are now just before we get properly started. So please just join in and we'll try and pick up any questions or comments you make as we go through. Okay, so welcome to today's webinar on finance process evolution. We'll be looking at more of our latest research and sharing what finance teams really think about their processes, looking at process automation and some of the emerging technologies, and how to embed a culture to make improvement happen, how sustainable automation is, and also a few thoughts on practicing ethical finance. Now, with today's panel, who are our IFOL Education panel, our experts, they deliver live virtual masterclasses each month, and we will be providing you, as usual, with a best practice guide following this session, so there's no need for you to take notes unless you really want to. Please put the questions you have in the chat and we'll try and pick them up. We also have a couple of polls. It'd be great if you could vote in those. I'm Sue Beardsmore, and on today's panel, we have three of our experts. Rod Chadwick, an accountant by training, holding senior roles for 25 years. As head of process improvement at the Royal Mail, Rod was in charge of their automation strategy, which delivered a return on investment running into millions. Martin Kirby is an order-to-cash leader with extensive operational experience leading large-scale transactional finance teams in high-volume environments for global companies. His expertise in the order-to-cash process is sought after by clients and associations operating in the finance shared services and credit management industry, and he's won multiple awards creating top-class order-to-cash teams. Patrick Wetzels, the director of Quick Consulting Limited, a consultancy in finance and innovative technology. He has 23 years experience in finance, including with JCI, SPX, SAI Global, Furcroft, Manchester Airport Group, and Deloitte. And he's skilled in project management, team development, finance processes, shared services, and finance systems. And I know, a bit of an expert on blockchain, so that's going to be great. We're kicking off with a poll though, and in the panel discussions, we'll be talking about emerging technologies. So we'd like to know now, please, which of the following do you have in your workplace? And this is a multiple choice, many as you have or think you have. Robotic process automation, RPA, blockchain, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, chatbots, big data management, machine learning, or none of the above. So as many as you think you have, if you could vote on this one, it's robotic process automation, RPA, blockchain, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, chatbots, big data management, machine learning, or none. And don't think about it too hard, but just give us your reactions to that, and then we can look and see where we think we are. Okay, we'll look at those results later, because at the moment we want to just be talking a little bit about what these things are, and I'm going to throw it open to the panel. In our last panel, we discussed the results of Global Process Report, and it was noted that a lot of processes weren't regularly reviewed, was considered inefficient, and there was a lack of priority given to process improvement. So we're going to continue that discussion and look at the process evolution. And firstly, we discussed process automation a lot, but are these other emerging technologies to consider? Now, let's kick off and we'll take them in order, perhaps. So who's going to kick me off with the first one that we looked at, which was RPA? Bit of a
I'll do RPA. That's my area I spent a lot of time with. So yeah, for those who've not come across it, robotic process automation is really aimed at large volume transactional work that's repetitive, that you can put rules around. And as long as you've got those conditions, you can put those rules around it and get a robot to do that work sort of 3 or 4 times faster than a person can do it. Right first time, 24 hours a day. I suppose the best way to think about it is, think of it in terms of an Excel macro, which most people are used to seeing. You know, it strings a load of instructions together. Think of that sort of on steroids and working across multiple platforms and linking different systems together. And it provides a huge advantage in the right circumstances.
Okay. Does anybody want to add anything? I mean, can we look at some of the advantages, possibly the disadvantages, or where it's not appropriate?
I think where it's certainly in my experience, where it's not appropriate is where you've got very complex, changeable circumstances in a process. So something like artificial intelligence or machine learning becomes much more appropriate there, because you don't have stable conditions, and so you need a different technology to solve the problem. In terms of the advantages, it's a difficult question to answer in a nutshell, because it depends on the problem you're looking for. So it can be about cost saving, it can be about getting fairly paid, it can be about compliance and audit checks. You know, there is multiple uses for the technology, and it really depends on the circumstances in your company.
Okay, Patrick, Martin, would you like to join in on RPA particularly at the moment? Anything to add?
For sure, thanks. I'm the same as Rob. I mean, just got to be careful. It's not iterative processes. It needs to be a volume process. The more the platform it develops as well, the easier it starts to become. It's sort of taking its command straight from the GUI line, as opposed to a key depression. So today's RPA is really in a different place than it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago when it started, and also combining all the good tech of scanning and taking all that information out of invoices and actually processing them. So it's all very good at that. There's some decent voice as well now on RPA as well, so they kind of interpret voice really well. And bring that in. But I'm with Rod. Nice, straightforward volume process for me. Everyone should have. Well, I think the original plan was everyone should have a RPA on the desk. I think Microsoft, in some respects, with Power Automate, have done that. But it's still a reasonable learning curve to get onto that. But yeah, so I think everyone should have one on the desk to do all that voluminous stuff. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you. Patrick, anything to add in here? Or?
Yeah. It was actually really interesting. Is it's a flow data. You know, there's data needed to run these processes, and which means that, and we'll talk more about that during the blockchain kind of element of it. But then the question is, are you going to capture the data all in one database and have it potentially exposed, or do you spread your data across a range of users and computers, and therefore being able to process more data and also having a better safeguard on it? So yeah, so that's kind of leading to my topic, but it's really all these emerging tech elements need a sound data strategy. So that's what's needed there.
Yeah. So you can't use them until you know what you're using them for or where to put them.
Yes. Also. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's allow you to get going. You lead us off on blockchain and give us a brief definition of that and where we might come across it, why we might come across it, what we could use it for.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So blockchain is a bit of a it's a very broad term for something that has a lot more layers. So what you're now seeing is that you'll see the name distributed ledger technology more than blockchain, and that is because blockchain, a lot of people will think of crypto. Now cryptocurrencies run on the back of a blockchain. So blockchain is almost like a byproduct of it, and really what it does, blockchain is nothing more than a set of data. Really, it's data flowing and being consolidated. Rather than having it all consolidated and sitting on one server, you're potentially using every server, every computer, every device that holds data will have a copy of the data set. And therefore, one of the benefits of it is that if you want to target and hack a single server, that's not too difficult. if you want to, if you have the same amount of data sitting as a replica copy on a million PCs or a million servers, then suddenly that becomes a lot more difficult. So blockchain is really is basically a set of is a replicated set of data across an infinite amount of servers or computers, and therefore therefore you don't have a single server holding all the data, and have a lot of servers holding the same data. So there are also security benefits to it, because basically the blockchain will run a consistency check and say, if I have block A1, it's the same block on every computer, on every server. If I want to change something as a hacker, I want to change something, and I want to change block 1 into block A1A, I will have 999,000 servers saying this block is called A1, and it's 1 that's showing A1A. So therefore, say something is wrong here. So it will then automatically cancel that block. So from a safety point of view, it's great, but also from a data sharing, because imagine that you have a database, and this database holds data that you put that in your database. On a blockchain, that database, every bit of data is coming from a source, so it's coming directly from source, and it's consolidating it all in your application. So rather than having your database sitting on one server, taking your data that you put on, you suddenly have access to potentially all the data in the world, and it's actually directly sourced, which means that it's hugely efficient, because you don't have to take that data from another server, copy it, type it in, and then work with it.
Okay, so security and efficiency,
Yes.
and in which particular industry or size of industry or whatever, which for would it be most used in? Do you see big?
Well, obviously, the more sensitive the data gets, the more useful it is. So, for instance, imagine the NHS using, rather than having all the data sitting on one server, now potentially it's sitting on every possible server you can imagine, every possible computer that you can imagine. It's now highly safe, because you can't target one server.
Okay, so Rod, any questions, anything to add about this, anything that strikes you, and also Martin? But let's kick off with Rod.
Nothing for me to add to that, I'm afraid. That I have to say that the blockchain technology, I have to say, is a new one for me too. I bow to Patrick's wisdom on this one.
Okay, and Martin, any questions or comments on?
Yeah, for sure. So I think provenance is the strong point here. So going back to origination, and where you've seen organizations that can have done reasonable amounts with blockchain. There's a big soap manufacturer that's got a big presence. They can drive down the cost of the transactions on and off the chain very, very quickly. I think, you asked for a use case, but charities is a huge use case for this as well. So you can actually follow where your payment is, or where your donation is, and actually go and then follow that all the way down the chain to see actually where it's being used. If you look at some of the other traditional methods that are likely to want to use this and reasonably use it would be certainly in FCMG, where if you look at the Walmart model, the USA one, you can actually pick a piece of fruit up off the counter to put in your basket. You can actually scan it, and you can actually see the person who's picked it and the tree it's come from, and that gives a great deal of marketing sense, especially when you're utilizing third world countries and it's made ethically sourcing. So it's really tracing that ethical sourcing. Anything around that ethical sourcing piece is pretty good. There are some at the minute still downsides to blockchain. A, it's quite expensive, and B, it takes a while to create the chain. That that's starting to change a little bit with more the options of going on and off the chain, and you'll see a lot of financial institutions will do that. But definitely, you know, certainly with blockchain, know your customer is completely finished, because you have to know your customer right from the outset. From the provenance example, it's very, very data driven, and there are a number of great other processes like Fabric and dependency, and then we've talked a little bit about crypto, but that even that space is changing now. The tokenization of your product could actually become a currency within the blockchain, and there isn't anywhere else that you can really do that. We used to try and do that with the early products like SAP, but not in any way as sophisticated as this. But it's really interesting. I think it's slowed down, but I think it's a product that will need to be deployed by countries and governments, and it's really interesting. The NHS was used in that commentary, and I think once it's pushed down from the top, because obviously where all the big contracts are, then I think the adaptability and the want to adapt that will have to become a norm. Otherwise, you won't get paid, or you won't, you know, for all those sort of reasons for that. Okay. But from if I was an accountant, great, it cannot fail. It really does blow double entry up, really, in the normal sense of the word. You know, it forensically is really, really really good. But you know, as we just said, it's really the skill is the currency and how you're trading, and that's starting to change all the time now. Okay. And that will all run on the back of blockchain as well. So yeah. So I think it's great. It's just expensive and a bit slow, I think, at the minute. But we will see. It is coming. It's not going away. It's for sure.
We'll all know more about it pretty soon. Thanks very much indeed. Perhaps we could, before we move on, run through 2 or 3 of the other things that we've mentioned. Cloud computing. Anybody want to take that on? Advantages, disadvantages, and where we see it most? Just as a run through.
I don't mind, Sue, taking the first one. I think there's an interesting thing about cloud computing, because it has been the panacea for getting anything automation. I mean, even we talked about RPA. Most of RPA now is in the cloud. I mean, it previously has been both ways, but it is most in the cloud now. The interesting thing about cloud computing is that you can actually really easily, generally, monetize down to the transaction level. So it becomes more transactional, and then OPEX, etc. And you can sort of do that. It's very interesting. A recent change now in finance doesn't allow that. So it'll be very, very interesting to see how cloud computing manages the change. It will now need to be costed as well in the first year. So many organizations, when they're invested in either invoice software or any software, they'll amortize it over 2 years, 3 years in their business case. Well, if that's a cloud computing piece of software, because they don't actually ever own it, it's now costed out in the first year. So people will have to readjust all those business cases pretty quick. But I think cloud computing, you know, we wouldn't be where we are today without it. It does provide for ease of application and an ease installation. But I know many IT people worry and have to put a considerable amount of steel around it to make sure that it's safe. But you know, in today's virtual desk, it is getting a lot easier to do. But yeah, cloud computing for me is here to stay, and it delivers benefit day one. You know, and fast for sure.
Yeah, Rod, anything to add? Any comments there?
Just take it backstage. People who perhaps not as familiar with, you know, what it is, if you like. I mean, essentially it's just the infrastructure that you run your systems on. So you know, traditionally, you know, go back to what we call on-premises systems, you know, big computer rooms in the office with you know, temperature controls and all the rest of it, with huge servers. There's no need for that now. Essentially, the servers are provided by a provider, the software is on it. And as Marty said, you know, you're up and running from day one. And I think the great thing it gives you is it removes that need for a big capital investment up front to begin with. So from a cash flow point of view, it's very beneficial for companies. and you know, secondly, it's scalable. You know, so if you're, you know, increasing size rapidly on a particular applications, that scalability is generally built in much more simply using cloud computing than it would be if you've got an on-premises system where you need to go, you know, buy additional servers every time you want to expand.
Okay, unless you have anything to add to what we've just heard, Patrick, perhaps you'd like to have a go at big data analytics and what that might mean for our processes.
Oh yeah, I mean that's obviously, you know, that's obviously going to be huge. I mean, obviously, you know, we're now in the age of big data. You know, again, I think it also calls for a question like, you know, where does the big data sit, and how do we keep it safe, and how do we keep it easily you know, accessible? But I think kind of with that with that aside, the potential is huge, and it's also going to change. It's also going to change the character of what finance does, especially the management accounting layer. Is going to be and you know, you can already see a shift with, you know, there are a number of tools are already out there, like Power BI. If you put that on top of big data, then the possibilities are endless. And if you then connect that to more and more data sources, blockchain, for instance, you know, then it's really going to change the way how we work, rather than the old-fashioned let's do a profit and a margin calculation. You can add so many factors to it, you know. You can, and which means also you can run you can forecast into for instance what we see now with AWS, which is the Amazon you know, equivalent, is that there's such a huge collation of data that they do. For instance, in farming, there are companies that can forecast drought, and they can and a famine into the next 100, 200 years, you know, and that's going to be the potential of big data. And so that means that also as a finance profession, we need to look beyond numbers. We need to make sure that we reskill so that we can leverage that data, that we can use that data, and that, because if you combine the numbers and then the trends and all of that extra data that you can gather through big data, then as I said, the possibilities are going to be endless. So that's something we need to get ready for.
Okay, so just before we move on to a little bit about the how, the last thing, few words on machine learning. Who'd like to take that one on? Rod?
Machine learning. I mean, really, machine learning is kind of an extension, really, of what RPA does. So where RPA is works as Martin said, within very specific frameworks, you know, where you've got rules and it's high volume and very, you know, limited number of exceptions. We've got more complex processes. So I mean, perhaps best to illustrate it with an example. If you're talking about, say, processing something like invoices within your sort of accounts payable section, you know, a traditional RPA type tool could have, you know, process those invoices by looking, you know, where is this information, go to a particular point on a particular piece of paper, pick that information off, you know, and then do something with it. In reality, you know, a lot of these types of things are going to be very different from different companies. So, and historically, if you go back sort of 5 or 10 years, the hit rate of accuracy on these things was quite low, and you're constantly reprogramming and reconfiguring. Machine learning, you know, you kind of set it going, you give it a data set to start with to say, well, here's an example, you know, here's 1,000 examples of what we've done, and here's the outputs. And then every time it sees it, then it can recognize these patterns, and it will learn. And that's the whole point of machine learning. It learns from the more that come through. You don't have to continue to reprogram the computer. The algorithms that power it will learn from those things and then build it in for the future. So it constantly evolves on its own without needing reprogramming. So it's a very powerful tool, and increasingly becoming, you know, cost effective to use. So again, if you went back 5 or 10 years, very expensive nowadays, and you need a data scientist to build the algorithms for you to do it nowadays. You can get stuff pretty much free. It's growing rapidly.
Right, let's have a little bit of a think about the how now. So anyone out there just starting their journey into automation, where would they find information to help them? Where should they go if they're really almost day one? They've heard some of these wonderful things that you've been talking about now, but they want to get going on it. Where would they start?
I guess it's dependent on which piece of what we've discussed today, but and Rod will know better. But RPA, that market is, I wouldn't say saturated, but there are just a number of vendors on that, and it's a dependency on what type of RPA process you're going to want to take on, because different software for different styles of process. But there's not that many. I think, Rod, I think we probably say there's 4 or 5, 6 market leading pieces of software there. They are there. And generally, most of them will give you intro. You know, so yeah, I think that's where I would go for RPA. AI, I think, is a slightly more difficult. There are a number of data science companies that have got some good AI. For me, I don't think AI is quite plug and play at the minute. It's nearly there. But there are some phenomenal things that you can do with AI in the right hands, you know, that will get you ahead of the curve. I've just done an AI project trying to detect fraud in a number of customers, and the success where we had no detection before, we can now more or less detect 30 to 40%, and that's significant in my organization. So I think AI is the new buzzword, and some of the learnings from that are really strong as well.
I think in terms of places, I was going to say in terms of places to go, if you didn't want to talk to vendors, LinkedIn's a great place to start. There's any number of networks. You know, if you wanted to talk about automation networks and so forth, there'll be multiple examples that you can use on LinkedIn where you can talk to people who've gone through similar processes. And certainly in my experience, you know, if you connect with people on LinkedIn, they're generally very happy to help you and talk you through their experiences. And again, from a personal point of view, conferences I think are quite useful. You know, yes, you're going to get the hard sell from a lot of the vendors, you know, with their product being the best things to slice bread. But given the fact you know that's going to happen, you're also going to get lots of people like yourselves who are looking for things. And again, you can build those networks to share experiences. So I think that those things are probably, you know, also if you've got something very specific in mind, absolutely, you know, we'll give you free copies. But otherwise, that's a good start point.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. Anything to add in there?
Yeah, I would even take it one step before that. I would first of all look what are you actually trying to solve? You know, so and that starts with really identifying the bottlenecks in your process. So because often it's because I've seen more than once that there was this need for something cool and for something new. But it actually needs to solve a problem, and then from once you've then identified your actual once you've identified the actual bottleneck, that's the time to then start looking at, okay, what do I think is, you know, what do I think is actually going to help? For instance, I've had clients who called me and said, well, you know, I want blockchain. And I was like, yeah, but why do you want blockchain? And then, well, I want a much more efficient process. I said, okay. And then once you then went through what their actual problem was, then it was like, but you don't need blockchain. You just need a better database, or I don't know, you know. So I think that I would say, like, because if you go to a specialist, a company, they will sell that to you. They will do. And I've had clients who there was one client who had spent $60,000 on effectively a database, which you could have had for a lot less. But she was so blockchain, but it wasn't actually blockchain. So first to look at actually trying to resolve.
Okay. So that brings us to the point, really. You need to look at what you're trying to do. You need to look at your processes before you can actually identify what you really need. So let me put this to you, gentlemen. In order to successfully implement that process automation, you have to review and standardize your processes. But how do you instill that culture of process improvement in your organization so it is business as usual? Because in previous discussions, we've seen that it's like, you know, the poor relation in some of what's going on in departments to look at that, you know, process improvement. What would your advice be in standardizing it?
It has to come from the floor, Sue, in my opinion. It's no good having a team of RPA engineers. I mean, it is good to have a team of RPA engineers, but the real practicality and the real adoption of that technology will only happen when you actually bring it down to the floor. That's the people that are going to end up operating that, or the people that are really experts within that process. And I think you know, there are a number of programs that a number of training programs that allow you to understand how to do that. But for me, the success, where we've seen a lot of success, is where we've, you know, these guys have been and sometimes as well, what can happen is they probably know the, you know, it's not the more sophisticated bits of re-engineering you need to do. It's the stuff that really affects them on a day-to-day basis that will really start to lean up that process. And so for me, I think in this, you've got to really start from the floor and really give people the opportunity to rise and be part of that. For me, I think also from our, you know, where you're talking about RPA, there has to be a fairly strong governance around it as well. You know, we just can't have everybody doing all RPA things, because guess what? All those instruction manuals and IRA guides that we wrote are all just not going to be working anymore. So there has to be a fairly strong governance. But there is some thought that, you know, releasing you know, teams to do RPA outside that governance it does sort of work in some organisations. So that's where I think from the floor is my you know, train the people from the floor to get that lined up properly.
Thanks a lot.
I completely agree with that. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Patrick.
No, sorry. I was saying, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think starting with a strong gap analysis is key. See how the data flows and see which and see between which hands it moves. You know, and then that goes back to my last point. You know, really identify the bottlenecks. Where does your organization need significantly more effort to process a certain batch of data, or you know, and see why it is. And often that is because Department A has a view of what Department B should be doing, and Department B has a view of what Department A should be giving them. So rather than letting both guess what the other side should be doing, get a formal agreement between those and start to build a flow of data where you remove all the friction. And so that's key. And so indeed, you know, you can only do that from the floor.
Okay, Rod.
Yeah, I totally don't disagree at all with what the guys have just said. I think also to get any sort of program like this off the ground, though, you do need to have as a precursor some senior sponsorship within the business. You know, ultimately, you're probably going to need some investment. So you need somebody who's got influence to the purse strings to actually release some funds for you to do it. And also, I'd say make someone responsible for it. You know, so whether it's a program, whether it's an ongoing thing, whether it's a permanent, you know, sort of continuous improvement role within the business. Again, I've seen examples where people have tried to do that and just said, well, you know, so just do it as, you know, in your spare time sort of thing, as well as your day job. It doesn't work. You know, it needs focus, it needs driving through, and it needs actually energy to make it happen. So I think, you know, between those three things, that's kind of your crucial parts to actually make it happen. And there's other techniques you can use to get people involved. You know, you can make, I mean, where I'm working now, you know, we're trying to get that culture instilled, and within FinOps, you know, we're making it bones for people to identify something in their area that they need to improve, and then to see it through. You know, so you can do small things like that as well to sort of help to move it along.
But a lot of buy-in and a lot of commitment to it. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on slightly. Everywhere, big focus on sustainability, not just in terms of green initiatives, but to do with technology and the use of advances and how they might be sustainable. How do you ensure that your process automation is sustainable? Patrick, what would you say you need to look out for?
Yeah, well, this is where the blockchain route is not the one immediately to go for, purely on that basis, because if you use an open blockchain, which means that anyone can join, so there's no one at the gate saying you can or cannot come in. That has a huge energy consumption. If you look at Bitcoin, which is the biggest application on blockchain in the world, has the same energy consumption as the whole country of Portugal. So that's not very energy efficient. So on the flip side, there are other iterations now which have their own limitations in terms of security and also provenance, but they will be more energy efficient. So but on a more general level, I think there's obviously something to really look at, but but I would generally automation and automation and sustainability are not necessarily best friends.
Okay, Rod, do you have a view or any tips on how to?
Particularly on the RPA side, which is there that I've got most experience in. Yeah, for me, it's the biggest reason actually why a lot of companies don't get to scale on automation, is because they don't think about the sustainability. And I mean sustainability in terms of actually sort of making it work rather than the wider sort of ESG type sustainability. Yeah. You start off and you've got 5-10 robots that it's really exciting. People are building these things and it's great. But then suddenly you get to a few more and you've then got a BAU estate you've got to manage, and you need to have processes and resources in place to actually do that. So you've got to have you've got to think about incident management, service level agreements, support, priority orders, change management, all those sorts of things that is a bit less dull than building robots, but actually unless you get it right, then you're going to fail. So I think it's early doors. You've got to really start thinking about the processes that you need to put in place to support it, and actually a recognition that there is going to be some resource requirements to support it as well. And I think the sooner you do that, the more likely you're going to be sustainable.
Okay, Martin, your views.
I think by the nature of what it is, it has to be sustainable. Automation, digitization enable greater resource efficiency, more timely production, and less waste, and improved quality. So that's paying back on that sustainability all day, I think, for me. I think the other thing about automation does as well, more soft thing, is all the same time the work becomes more meaningful. So taking the robot out of the human, and then the human then doing more meaningful things, and I think that enables more development of that person, more development, and in that HR capital space. So.
Okay, and presumably part of sustainability is actually finding the right thing that you need at the right time, rather than going for the shiny new product and then finding you've got to do something different quite soon.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's one that Rod sort of talks about, is just don't go and try and get the best one. It's more about trying to align it. I think one thing that we didn't, a lot of the automation around systems now, there are some sort of sophisticated process mining tools which actually will show you where the systems are defecting or defaulting, which then enable you then to start to bring that digitization and automation together. And I think the combination of using I know they're complex, but these mining tools can really drill down to that sustainability as well.
Okay, well, we've just got a few more minutes left, so why not open up a massive new topic? I just want a few comments from each of you. With the current situation in Ukraine and Russia highlighting the need to understand your supply chain and customers, what advice from each of you in turn do you have for ensuring that members are practicing ethical finance? what would your top tips be? We'll start off with you, Martin, as you in the chair.
Okay, thank you. It's a nice, easy one for me. Obviously, I head up all of credit risk for Scottish Water. We have just completed a complete inventory of all our customers and the people that are principals in those organisations, just to make sure that we are trading ethically and correctly with our customers, and we will raise that. I think it's the most unusual world event that organisations are starting to catch up with, especially in the UK. Some other organisations fast. So for me, I think we have done the right thing. We want to understand where the origination is from these organisations that we're trading from, and then I think we'll need to understand what we need to do going forward to support that agenda. I think if that answers the points.
Yeah, thank you. Patrick, what would your top tip be for beginning to practice ethical finance?
Ethical finance. Well, that goes back to the more directly that you're connected to source, the less change you actually have in between, the more chances you have of actually having ethical finance. So kind of going back to the point which was made earlier by Martin. For instance, in the food industry, if you know that what you're selling is actually ethically farmed, and you can actually put a stamp on it, and you have full traceability, then that's going to it cannot get more ethical than that. So which also means that as a finance organization, you can also truly claim that the reports that are going out, and you're claiming that things are ethical, that it actually is ethical.
Yeah, so know what you're dealing with. Rod, exactly. Anything to add to this?
Yeah, in terms of the Ukraine situation, I think touching on what Martin said, really, the first and foremost, you have to recognise that the sanctions are law. So you need to do them, and you also need to stop trading with companies that are sanctioned. So there are technical things that you can do to help that. So with sales orders, you can link through an API into something like a Dow Jones or company like that, so that every single sales order checks for that company is not on the sanction list, so you actually stay in the right side of the law, which is obviously a great idea. But I think this one's kind of different. I think for me, this is very different from other sanctions I've seen in the past, in that there's an awful lot of stuff that's led from the employees, public opinion, shareholders, and so forth. And the big difference for me is that I think that some of the actions that are being taken now are not just sort of, okay, let's do this for 6 months until the war finishes. People are taking longer term, 5-10 year decisions.
Yeah.
Completely changing the way that they're actually approaching their, their supply chain as part of this. So I think, it's not just about the law; it's actually about reputation as well. And so, a lot of companies, I think, have pulled out of Russia through sort of public pressure and employee pressure. For the reputational hit that it will take. So I don't think you'll see an awful lot of companies going back anytime soon. So from a supply chain point of view, you have to then think this is not a temporary blip. This is something we've got to look at longer term. Supply chain going.
Thank you very much indeed, and thanks to all of you for being on the panel today. The Finance Process Survey report's now available to download from the IFOL website, and we're also in the process of launching our Q2 survey. Finance Leadership will be launching in April, so please look out for a link to participate in your inbox. And we'll also be launching our events programme for 2022 in the next few weeks, with some really exciting news on our annual conference in London and Tampa coming soon. So for now, our thanks to Rod, Martin and Patrick. Thanks to you for joining us. And the webinar will be available on demand on the IFOL website from tomorrow. Please feel free to share with any colleagues or friends who you may feel benefit from it. For now, from all of us, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.